Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're enjoying your Tech Ed experience. HTML5 is here, and the web will never be the same. Now, perhaps you've heard that statement before, and if you didn't roll your eyes, perhaps you're a little bit confused about what I possibly mean by HTML5. Perhaps you're struggling as a developer or technologist to really understand what HTML5 means to you and what it means to the companies you work for and the clients that you serve. And my goal here today is to tell you, first of all, that you're not alone in feeling that way. HTML5 means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I also want to give you an approach, a way that you can evaluate and look at HTML5 technologies without sucking up all of your free time. And in a way that you can do it to allow you to move forward and adopt technologies in your business and for your clients. Now, so my goals for today are to help you understand what HTML5 actually means and what it means to you, and then how you can go and start using HTML5 in your applications today, and what you can actually use, and then finally how you can keep up with what's happening and what's next in the web. So as we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Brandon Satrom. I am a developer evangelist with Microsoft based in Austin, Texas, where I live with my beautiful wife and my two beautiful boys. I have been a web developer my entire career. I will probably be a web developer my entire career. You can reach me at userinexperience.com or on Twitter as Brandon Satrom. So a couple of months ago when I started working on this presentation, I used this great feature on the Tech Ed website where I was able to ask for feedback from folks that were coming on what you actually wanted to hear. And I got lots of great comments and feedback, and these were the things that people said they wanted to get out of this session today. And I really want to thank Arun Raj, Sahar, Eric, Emil, Alexander, Nia, Bob, and Ken for providing feedback, because you guys really helped shape this session. And if you're here, if any of you guys are here, please come up afterwards and introduce yourself so that I can thank you in person. So what is HTML5? Well, maybe HTML5 is where the web is going. And by the way, this is the official HTML5 gang sign. So if you're looking for one to add to your repertoire, that's possible. To some, HTML5 is where the web is going. To others, it means everything that's new and interesting on the web. To others, it's just some new markup. Is it all or none of these things? To some, HTML5 is just websites with rounded corners, right? And so I'd be remiss. This slide doesn't have rounded corners, so let me go ahead and fix that. Perfect. Now I have an HTML5 slide deck as well. But what I really care more about is what HTML5 means to you, the tireless and enterprising developer that's probably feeling more than a little overwhelmed with the pace of change and the technologies that you have to keep up with every day. I mean, we have enough things to keep up with on our servers not to have to worry now about this new bevy of client technologies that also have to get added to our list, right? I mean, I'm not the only one that tends to feel overwhelmed about that kind of thing, am I? I'm not here to make you feel overwhelmed today. And so I'm not going to give you the 1,000-foot view of all 100-plus specifications that are considered HTML5. I'm not going to give you the dog and pony show. What I do want to give you is some things that you can actually use today, some things that you can keep track of, things that you can pay attention to. Because HTML5 is huge, but what you probably care most about is what you can use today, what you can implement moving forward. And when I say HTML5, and what it means to you, I mean, what do you care about? What are you actually adopting, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to have the tools to decide what actually matters for you. And so I want you to have a process for evaluating technologies and some ideas of technologies that are available across all browsers today, as well as how you implement those things and how you implement them without leaving older browsers behind. So all that said, the agenda for today is this. We're going to define HTML5 pretty quick. I'm going to drill that down into what I consider to be the 5 most important words as they relate to HTML5. I'm going to define a handful of technologies that you can and should use today, and I'll talk about where to look to find the things that are coming next on the web. Talk about some of our development tools at Microsoft and their place with HTML5, and then some things that you should learn. So let's get started by defining HTML5 and doing away with HTML5 meaning different things to different people, and instead coming up with something that we can all agree on. And the definition that I tend to use, and one that I think gels with the W3C's definition, the World Wide Web Consortium, or the standards body that owns the HTML5 standards process, is that HTML5 is HTML and CSS and JavaScript. that it is an umbrella term that represents all of these different things. And inside of each of one of those terms that make up that definition are things that we care about, like new markup, like microdata and canvas and video on our pages, like new styling concepts in CSS3, like media queries and transforms and transitions. And then new great JavaScript APIs that give us the ability to do things like geolocation and access local storage and file objects on a user's system as well. Now, it's important to understand that this is just a subset of all of the technologies that fall under HTML5. There are 100 plus specifications that actually fall under that umbrella term of HTML5. I can't even list them all on a single slide, much less define them all for you today. And so you need to know that it's really, really big, that there's a lot of stuff. Now, the W3C recognizes this, and so as a result, they've grouped all of these things into 8 areas that we can use to reason about them in a smaller subset. So it's things like performance, and that is web workers for faster JavaScript on our pages, and a new XML HTTP request object. That's things like semantics, the new markup, and the new attributes that we can rely on. Styling on our pages, CSS3, and also better typography using the Web Open font format. Multimedia, so this is new audio and video as first-class citizens in our markup. 3D effects using technologies like Canvas and SVG. Offline and storage, so that we can now finally create web applications that don't have to have an internet connection in order to function, and also use local storage and richer database access inside of the browser. Connectivity, so things like web sockets and server-sent events so that we can communicate with our servers in real time. And then finally, device access for things like geolocation and also webcam and microphone access inside the browser. Now, all that sounds fantastic, but only a percentage of what I mentioned today is actually available in any, if not all, browsers today. So when you look at this, know that these things, this terminology that the W3C has used, this grouping, is intended to represent the future of HTML5, where we're going now and in the months and years to come. So beyond that, we have 100 plus specifications. We have 8 technology groupings. We also have a 5-stage specification process that we have to be aware of. So every single spec that falls under that umbrella starts and goes from first published working draft to working draft, and then to last call, and then to candidate recommendation, and then to recommendation, right? The W3C has committees upon committees upon committees upon committees. There's a lot of conversation that goes into these things because we need to get them right. And so a couple of takeaways for you here are that some of these things are done and some of them are not, right? Of all these specifications, all of them move through this process, and they all move through at different rates of change. Some of them kind of tend to move together. But not only that, where something falls in the process does not necessarily dictate whether or not it's widely available across all browsers today. So for example, technologies that we commonly associate with HTML5 as being widely supported in our browsers, things like Canvas and CSS transforms and transitions and web storage, those things are implemented across all browsers, and yet they're still in working draft stage. Now in the coming days, they're going to move to last call, but they're still in stage 2 or 3 of 5. So we can't rely on just knowing where a specification sits to know whether or not we're able to use it. So the takeaways for you are this, that HTML5 is a term that represents a lot of what's new and what's next in the web, but it is not in itself one thing, right? I don't believe, and it's not even necessarily all things that are site-ready or available for you to use to target all browsers today. There is no such thing in my mind as adopting HTML5 or upgrading to HTML5. I believe that instead, there are things that you as a developer will choose to care about and adopt, and your best bet is to be aware of where things fall in the specification process, but more importantly, to be aware of those things that are widely supported across all browsers or most of the browsers today, and target those things for your users. So that said, I'm hoping that after you're hearing 8 groupings, 100 plus specifications, and 5 categories, you're not starting to feel overwhelmed. If you are, let me take that definition of HTML5 and give you what I think are the 5 most important words that really summarize most of the conversation today about HTML5. And the first word is hyperbole. Now, you knew that HTML5 was a big deal, right? You've obviously heard of it. You're here because you've heard of it. Hopefully, if you wandered in and decided to stay, I appreciate that. But you've probably heard of HTML5. It has its own logo. It has its own stickers, right? I mean, it's a brand. It's not just something we talk about technologically, but it's a brand. And I don't know about you, but I never knew of any XHTML t-shirts. If there was one, I probably would have worn it, because that's pretty geek chic right there. But I never knew of such a thing, right? HTML5 is obviously surrounded by a lot of hype. A lot of people are talking about it, and it's very easy to get confused not only about what it means, but it's easy to get caught up in too much of that hype and really think that it's going to solve all your problems. And it's not going to solve all your problems. It's not going to fix all of your issues as a developer or all your company's issues. Your best bet with HTML5 is to take everything about HTML5 with a grain of salt. And in the immortal words of the playwright Shakespeare, as paraphrased by the great 20th century poet Flavor Flav, don't believe the hype. But do believe that HTML5 is a big deal, and it is changing the web fundamentally. In a lot of ways, HTML5 represents the realization of much of what birthed the Web 2.0 movement in the middle of the last decade. So a lot of those principles are seeing themselves manifest in the specifications that we're seeing come across. And not only that, but all of the browser vendors are in with HTML5 and are part of the specification process and adopting it and refining it and working on it. So you have a bit of a balancing act as a developer in both sort of eschewing the hyperbole while at the same time understanding that it's important and something that you should pay attention to. Now, the second word is compatibility. And I'll say that through this statement, that the web is the largest legacy software system in the history of the universe. Right? The web has over 50 years of servers and over 50 years of sites, and nearly everything that has ever been created for the web is still sitting somewhere on a server waiting for someone to visit it with a browser. Right? Which means that all those old GeoCities sites are still out there. And all of those animated under construction logos for sites that are never going to get built are still out there, right? And we have a responsibility, and under construction logos are not, in spite all of the bells and whistles of our specifications and our browsers, it's important that we not leave behind those sites that are still there. That we allow those legacy sites, those legacy pages to still render properly, because many people still depend on those things. We don't have an expectation that everybody's going to upgrade to HTML5. And so the specification was not written in such a way. And it's important, I mentioned compatibility because also as developers, I think it's important for us to remember that when we adopt HTML5. That we can adopt these new technologies for those users that are using a modern browser. But do not leave behind those users that are still visiting in older browsers. Because they still make up a significant percentage of most of your sites, I'm sure, and they will for a time. We have a responsibility not to leave those users behind even as we move forward. And I'll talk a little bit about that today. The next word is semantics. And in the context of HTML5, you often hear the terms neutral versus rich semantics. And semantics just means meaning. Right? The div, our old friend the div, that generic sectioning element, is semantically neutral. It is meaningless in terms of conveying why that element exists on the page or what it's actually doing there. Now, what we tend to do to actually deal with that today is we'll assign IDs or class names to our divs so that we can select and style those elements, but also so that we can provide a little bit of documentation to other developers of what we're actually doing with that element on the page. Now, as a part of the specification process that the W3C went through, they mined billions and billions of web pages to find out what were the IDs and class names that we were using in our pages. And once they threw out div1, div2, div3, etc., they looked at the bigger list and said, these are the things that really matter. And they used that and input that into the process. The term that the W3C uses for that is paving the cow paths, right? We looked at what developers were doing today and allowed that to continue rather than asking for change. The end result that we have is tags like header and footer and nav and article that tell us in more semantic richness why these elements exist and what they mean. Now, next is JavaScript. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably picked up on JavaScript in the late 90s and considered it to be kind of a toy language, right? Not anything to be taken seriously. When we first started doing JavaScript development in the mid to late 90s, we tended to do as little of it as possible. It wasn't even enabled in all browsers when it was first implemented, and even then it wasn't turned on by default. And so we deferred most of our work to the server, and websites were thin clients that weren't really doing that much. Most of our JavaScript at the time was for browser detection so that we could enable specific features in the DOM that other browsers didn't have. Or around the beginning of this century, around early 2000s and culminating in 2005, Ajax became a big deal. Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And JavaScript was the glue that held that together. And Ajax kicked off this bevy of changes to the underlying web that made it more dynamic and made application development on the web more possible. Our clients grew, the servers started to shrink, and JavaScript was the reason that that happened. That's even continued today, where we're asking more and more of our JavaScript, where it's doing even more, almost to the point where in some cases it's outstripping use of what we ask for our servers to do. And we're doing more and more to actually have client-only applications. Now, and JavaScript is making that possible. In HTML5, if you read these specifications, if you look at what's out there, I mentioned JavaScript APIs as a line because that's a big deal. There are lots of APIs that are JavaScript-specific APIs that you need, just not a framework, but just JavaScript as a language to manipulate and to use things like geolocation and Canvas. So if JavaScript isn't yet back to being a first-class language for you, it should be, because it really is worth another look. And the final word is polyfilling. Now, polyfilling is defined by Paul Irish as a shim that mimics a future API, providing fallback functionality for older browsers. And this is like Spackle for your websites. So you might look at the HTML5 specifications and think to yourself, I can't possibly adopt these things. 60% of my users are using a browser where this stuff isn't going to work. And I'll ask you not to take that attitude until you actually see some of the things that you can do with polyfilling. Right? This is a very important piece of your tool set as a developer that wants to adopt HTML5 and goes along with that second word of compatibility. Because polyfilling allows us to target new features and functionality and not break our sites for users that are visiting in an older browser. In some cases, it allows us to bring them up to the present and give them sort of similar implementations of those features that we want to use. And so one great example that tends to be associated with polyfilling is Modernizer. And Modernizer is a JavaScript library that you include in your site and reference, and it adds a couple of different things. Number one, it adds some feature detection capabilities for you. So we've moved past the days of browser and version detection into just feature detection. Because all you care about as a developer is whether or not a certain feature, like geolocation, is enabled. Once I have access to Modernizer, I can query the Modernizer object and any one of its many, many properties to determine whether or not this HTML5-like feature that I want is available for me to use. So in this case, I'm using the CSS3 border radius module, which is so I can round corners on all of my pages like a good HTML5 developer. But it just so happens that that's actually not supported in older browsers. Right? So I can actually query modernizer.borderRadius and find out that if that's not supported, then use jQuery to in the background, conditionally load jQuery.corner plugin, select all of my articles on the page, and round those corners that way. And you'll see a demo of that in a second. The takeaway at this moment is that a library like Modernizer and any one of the countless polyfilling libraries that help you bring sites up to spec or provide graceful degradation are important tools for you to have as an HTML5 developer. So let's shift gears now and talk about some of the things that you can use today. I want to talk about 6 different things, 5 directly through demos, and then CSS3 woven throughout, and some of the things that you can adopt today. And these are the things that we at Microsoft are calling site-ready HTML5. This is mature stuff that is supported across all the major browsers and that you can target consistently across all of those browsers. And the first is using that semantic markup, actually relying on that new markup in your pages. There's a couple of different things that we gained with the HTML5 specification in terms of our markup. And the first is we got some cruft out of the way. So if you remember our old friend, the XHTML document, this is the smallest XHTML document I can fit on a single slide. As an HTML5 document, that just looks pretty much like this. So I get the giant doc type declaration out of the way, my meta char set tag changes, and I get something a lot simpler. If you see default HTML5 templates from tools like Webmatrix or Visual Studio, this is what those things are going to look like. And this is not only supported in modern browsers, but it will continue to work in older browsers as well. So this is something that you can adopt today. There are 28 new elements. Not all of those are on this slide. These are some of the notable ones. And those are the great, and I could spend 2 or 3 hours just talking about what those elements are, what they mean, and why you would use them. So I'm not going to be able to talk about all those specifically. I will demo a few of those things. But the great thing, again, about that word semantic is that most of these terms probably mean exactly what you think they mean. which is a nice thing about that, with the exception of the Ruby tag, which doesn't mean anything like what you think it means. So let's actually do a demo right now and look at semantic markup. So I have my little HTML5 blog page here. I'll go ahead and show it to you. That's not the page. Pull it up in the browser, and as you can see, I have just a basic of my title. I have a couple of blog posts. I have a header and sidebar and a footer. Simple, and I also have my nice, don't miss it, this is important, I have my nice rounded corners there as well. So in order to implement that, this is my actual document. I have my doc type declaration, my simple doc type declaration here, and then once I switch into the body tag, I'm using this nice new markup. I'm using header, just as it sounds, that's for the header of my page. I'm going to only go quickly through some of these things, but you'll get what they mean. I'm using nav. I have a section here for the blog itself. I can have another header inside of that section, inside of those grouping sectioning elements. I have a couple of article tags. And I will say briefly, don't think article is only for news items or only for news or blog posts or things like that. Look at article, as Bruce Lawson would say, more like an article of clothing as opposed to an article in a news item. This is just a discrete thing that can be syndicated. And that's the intention for it. So you could use this article tags around every item in a catalog or something along those lines as well. I have headers and footers inside of my articles. And I'm using the aside tag for my sidebar, nav in this section as well, and then my footer. A couple of things that are worth mentioning inside of here as well is that inside of my article tag, I'm actually using this figure tag to just mark up a call out. And then I'm also using this new time tag to provide a machine-readable time value. Now, I'm providing the friendly version of that time here, but because this could potentially be syndicated, I'm providing a machine-readable date. This is very useful in SEO or being syndicated to another location as well. And then finally, I'm using this mark tag here. And the mark tag was actually something that the browser will style for me. The purpose of the mark tag is to actually surround a section of text in the page that you want to let the browser know this is important to call out. And so without me actually having to style that, what IE9 will do is actually highlight and italicize that element, and all the browsers will do something similarly. So I didn't have to style that individual element. The most common use for the mark tag would probably be search results on a page, right? You search from an external site like Bing or Google, or possibly search results from your own search box on the page. So this is all fine and good. I'm going to see what happens when this works when I try to run this in an older browser. So if anybody's using IE9, hopefully you are aware of the F12 developer tools. If not, hit F12 and you're good. The F12 developer tools have been in IE since 8 and are a really nice set of tools that you can use. As you would see in other developer tools and other browsers, we have console access, script access, live updatable HTML access, and things like that. What I'm actually going to do here is use this feature that allows me to change the browser mode from Internet Explorer 9 back to Internet Explorer 8. And so I can use this very quickly to see, okay, I'm great. I've adopted this new markup. What happens when I set my site back to Internet Explorer 8? Everything's gone. So you may be thinking to yourself at this point, that's great. I'm going to adopt this new markup, and it's not going to work for 60% of my users. So I'm just going to wait on HTML5 for about 5 years. Thank you very much, and you're probably sneaking out the back door right now. Before you go, please, let me implore you to instead try a different approach. I will tell you very quickly first, the reason why this does not work is because these are elements that IE8 doesn't recognize. And because they're elements it doesn't recognize, it doesn't add them to the DOM. And because it doesn't add them to the DOM, I cannot select them in CSS and style them. So all I need to get this to work is not for the browser to recognize these as HTML5 elements, but for those things to actually be in the DOM. And so I mentioned Modernizer earlier, and I have Modernizer here inside of my site, Modernizer 1.7.js, and I've downloaded this. And I'm just going to add this into my site. And just by adding a reference to Modernizer and saving the page, I can get back 90% of what I had before. So rather than waiting on HTML5 markup, rather than surrounding the new semantic tags with divs with the ID that match those tags so that you can style them separately, I would just ask that you look at Modernizer, because what Modernizer basically does is it brute force adds these items to the DOM. So it calls document.createElement nav, document.createElement footer, document.createElement header 28 times. And once those elements are in the DOM, even though they're arbitrary as far as IE8 is concerned, you can select and style them accordingly. Now, you may be saying to yourself, but Brandon, you don't have rounded corners. How can you possibly ship this site as is? Well, I would tell you, if you were to say such a thing, that I can also use Modernizer to help me with that. And in order to do that, I'm going to copy in something very similar to what you just saw in the slide a few moments ago. I have Modernizer added into my page. I will reference the Modernizer object and reference its border radius property. And so you'll see that you have a ton of properties here in Modernizer to check for support for things like audio and Canvas and SVG and things like that. And just by knowing whether or not that's been supported, I can then make a decision. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use jQuery's fantastic getScript method, which will go and load jQuery.corner.js asynchronously for me in the background. I'm going to select all my article tags, and I'm just going to call .corner. And then I'm also going to select my figure, because I noticed that my figure tag was also, my figure element was also not rounded, so I'm going to select that as well. And I will reload the page. And I have my wonderful, nice rounded corners. Now, if I turn on network profiling, which is another great feature of the DevTools in IE9, go back to the page, reload it, you'll notice that what's happening here is jQuery.corner is being loaded for me, just as you would expect. Now, what's cool about this method, and there's another thing worth mentioning of using Modernizer and using jQuery to actually conditionally load these scripts for me, is that when I switch back to IE9, I still have my rounded corners, but I'm not loading that script. I'm not adding to the script processing burden for users that support the border radius property through their browsers. So I can use this opportunistically, which is a really great feature of using Modernizer. And then also worth mentioning that with that semantic markup, my CSS looks a lot cleaner. I can select these elements just as they exist. I'm no longer having my CSS with a lot of dots and pound signs for class and ID selection. Those will still be relevant in a lot of cases, right? You're still going to use the div. These 28 elements don't completely replace the div. It just changes the amount of, it just really reduces the number of times that you would need that tag necessarily. And then you'll see here that I'm using the border radius property to round my corners. Worth mentioning. So, that is a quick look at semantic markup. Let's talk now about Canvas and SVG, which are two graphics technologies related to the web. Canvas is a really interesting specification. It's actually both an HTML spec for the tag itself and a very rich JavaScript API. The Canvas element is essentially a scriptable image tag on your page, right? It is a pixel, you have pixel level control over a drawing surface on your page. And so if you're somebody that's interested in HTML5 but not interested in JavaScript necessarily, I'll tell you that you can put a Canvas tag on the page and then watch it do nothing. My point is that you need to use JavaScript and use it very heavily in order to do anything productive with the Canvas element. And so in this case, I'm selecting the canvas from the page, and I'm calling getContext, and I'm getting its two-dimensional context, which gives me the APIs that I need to do things like creating this black rectangle on the page and a 15-pixel wide orange round line on the page as well. Now, this is great. One thing I will mention as well is you not only need JavaScript to do things useful with Canvas, but you sometimes need a lot of it. So if you're looking at getting into Canvas, just be aware that it's something that's going to require a lot. Again, with pixel-based animation, with that great power, comes a lot of work necessary in order to get things like that to really sing. Now, the other technology that's worth mentioning that you can't see here is SVG. So I'm just going to show it to you in a demo. We'll start with Canvas first, though. Now, you know, most of us have probably, if we've seen anything about Canvas online, we've probably seen a game or some animation. So it may be easy to think, well, I really don't have to care about Canvas because I'm not a game developer. I would rather, and why don't I go ahead and switch my computer? I think instead, I would rather give you something a little bit more practical, something that you can look at that you might actually use in one of your applications today. And I think that data visualization is a nice use case for Canvas as well. So I have a table of data on my page. Very simple table. It's just some employee sales data. And I ship this out to my customer, and they say, you know, that's really great, but I need a chart because I can't read this. This is annoying to me. So I can actually use Canvas to do this. And I'll use Canvas along with jQuery and a jQuery plugin called Visualize, jQuery Visualize from the Filament group. And jQuery Visualize is a plugin that actually allows me to take existing table data on the page, which therefore, by the way, makes it more accessible. Take that existing table data and dynamically create a Canvas element and then draw that data in the form of a Canvas element on the page. So I'll go to the bottom of the screen here, and I will add in my call to the Visualize plugin. And all I'm doing here is saying sales.visualize. So I'm calling the plugin to actually take that table data, interpret it, and visualize it. And then I'm going to use jQuery's hide function to actually remove the existing table data, because now I have that pretty chart. So I'll refresh the page, and you notice now that I have this nice Canvas element. I can right-click on this. This is not a plugin. This was not generated for me dynamically on the server and pushed down as a static image. I will prove it to you, again, opening up the developer tools. And I'm going to use this feature that allows me to select an element by click. I will click on the Canvas element. No, really, I will. Refresh the page. Click on the Canvas element, and you can see this is just an empty, it's just a self-closed Canvas element, 500 width, 217 height. All of the real work in this element is happening inside of this script file, visualize.jQuery.js. And so this is great. So again, I think that Canvas, a great use case here is data visualization, right? This is something we do a lot in our applications. I don't need any trickery on the back end to generate this for me. I don't necessarily need any plugins to do this. This is something I can do, any server-side plugins to do this. I can use a jQuery plugin, or I can do this myself if I'm so inclined. But you may ask yourself, that's fantastic, once again, but what do I do when I'm running in Internet Explorer 8? Not only does it not work, but I'm going to be getting script errors. The reason that that doesn't work in IE8 is because the getContext method, the getContext function, doesn't exist, right? There is the IE browser, IE8 browser, does not recognize getting the two-dimensional context of a Canvas element because it doesn't know what a Canvas element actually is. So I can again use Modernizer in order to implement this. And I've already added a reference to Modernizer onto my page. And what I'll do now is update my script here, and I'm going to visualize and hide that chart again, this time creating an area chart. And this time I'm going to check Modernizer's Canvas property. If it's supported, I'll draw the chart. If not, I'm going to actually load in a JavaScript file called Explorer Canvas or XCanvas that gives me Canvas support in IE7 and 8, and I believe IE6 as well. So I can use this to provide Canvas support. Again, this is the point of polyfilling. I'm using the same API fundamentally, but I'm allowing this older browser to be brought up to the present and use some of these new features. So I'll go ahead and save that, refresh the page again, and now I have my nice area chart here. If I go to the Network tab again, refresh the page, XCanvas is being loaded dynamically. If I change my document mode back to IE9, XCanvas is not being loaded. So again, I'm opportunistically loading that, and I can adopt Canvas today and provide support for that across older browsers. Actually, before I'm switching back, let's go back and let me show you SVG. And I also want to mention that if you're using Visual Studio 2010 and you haven't yet downloaded SP1, I would encourage you to do so. This actually has some relevance to your HTML5 development. If you are using it, hopefully you know that we've added HTML5 schema support and IntelliSense into Visual Studio 2010 SP1. So you can go into Tools, Options, Text Editor, HTML Validation, and you actually have the HTML5 target schema now. And as I mentioned, you do have IntelliSense, so you can actually refer to the new elements. You have IntelliSense at the element level, also at the property level. That's nice. You get that same thing inside of Expression Web 4, which I'm going to use to show you the SVG demo. If anybody's using Expression Web 4, there was also a Service Pack 1 release recently, where you have similar support, not only HTML5 the doc type in IntelliSense, but also CSS support. So I can go into Tools, Page Options, the Authoring tab, and you'll see that I have a document type declaration here for HTML5, as well as the schema version CSS3 draft. So I can get IntelliSense at that level too. So SVG is an interesting graphics technology because it's actually XML-based representations of images. It's a set of related specifications, but it's scalable vector graphics. And those graphics are represented through XML markup in our pages. So I create an SVG element. In this case, I'm going to draw the HTML5 logo. So I create a bunch of polygons and child elements. I fill those elements. And then for the second, I'm going to create the HTML5 CSS styling logo on the page. And I'm going to use the path elements to do this as well. You probably know by seeing this that SVG may not be something that you would manipulate or create by hand. A lot of our popular design tools export SVG as an output type. Again, this is an image, but the point of using this is a scriptable, stylable image, very similar to Canvas. And there's a lot of overlap between the two, but definitely some nuances into when you would use one or the other. So I'm going to run this in Internet Explorer 9. I have my HTML. Again, these are images. I can right-click and actually save this picture as. It's going to attempt to save as a type of SVG, but this is not defined as an image tag, but actually as markup in my page. Because that's defined in such a way, I can actually manipulate it. I can actually not only manipulate it in JavaScript, but select and do things with it via CSS. So I'm going to come to the top of the page, and I'm going to copy in some inline styles here. And what I'm doing here is I'm setting a padding and a background color. I'm selecting my SVG elements. I'm also using some new CSS3 properties like border radius. I'm using a MS Transform, the CSS3 Transform property, to actually scale down the image to 75%. And then I'm putting in a nice box shadow so it looks very pretty. I'm also using the CSS3 Hover Pseudo Selector to say that whenever I hover over this image, scale that up to 0.9. So I'm not going to be able to spend a lot of specific time on CSS3 today. I wish I could. But I do want to say that you'll see in some of the new CSS3 modules that we're adding some behavior and functionality to CSS that really takes it beyond where it's been in just simple styling. We're moving to a point where some of the things that we used to use JavaScript for are getting moved into and available for us to use inside of CSS3 now and in the future. The advantage is the browsers will run that faster. We'll have less script overall, so we can save our script processing and load for the things that really matter, those more dynamic features and behavior that we want to add. So I'll save this, go back and run the page, and now I have my nice little boxes here around the SVG element, my nice box shadow, and then the CSS3 logo has actually been styled in a colored green. The way that I did that, which I skipped very quickly, was I selected the style element and set its path, selected the path child, and filled that green. So these are images on the page, but they're images that I can change dynamically, that I can change in CSS, that I don't have to generate as a static image actually on the page itself. So let's talk now about audio and video. Audio and video tend to be sort of the poster children of HTML5. These are now on parity with our old friend, the image tag, in terms of just being markup on our pages. And that's great news. There is one good thing and one unfortunate thing that I want to tell you about HTML, and I have another one that's not working, about audio and video on the page. One is that because these elements are markup on the page, that they are selectable through JavaScript. They are manipulable through JavaScript. Now, the unfortunate part about audio and video is that even though all of the browser vendors have agreed to use them and treat these as first-class elements, they have not all agreed on the proper codecs to support for audio and video. So you actually are recommended right now to provide at least 3 sources of video or audio inside of those tags, and then fall back to a plugin like Silverlight or Flash for older browsers that don't support those. I'll show you that right now. So for audio and video, I'm actually going to pull up Microsoft's Web Matrix. And I'm going to pull up Web Matrix because I also want to let you know about something HTML5 related inside of Web Matrix. And that is, since we shipped this in January, when you create a new file, any HTML file in Web Matrix, that it uses the HTML5 doc type by default. So just FYI, if you haven't downloaded Web Matrix yet, definitely go to web.ms and download it because it's a pretty sweet tool. So I have my video tag here inside of the page. Just my markup, I'm giving it an ID, I'm specifying a poster, saying that I want it to autoplay, that I want some controls on the page, et cetera, et cetera. I'm also specifying a width. And then finally, I'm providing a couple of sources here. What will happen with the browsers is that they will actually interpret these, attempt to play these from top to bottom. It'll first attempt to play video.mp4. That'll work in IE9, so that'll be served. It's then going to attempt to play video.webm in another browser, right? So if this actually runs in, if I run this in Google Chrome, what's going to happen is MP4 is not going to work, so it's going to go to the next line in the list and attempt to run that, and WebM actually will work. And then finally, I've put a Silverlight object in the center of this so that if I'm actually not running in a newer browser, that it'll actually just put that object tag on the page as well. So let's go ahead and run this. So I have this nice video on the page here. It's running. I have the controls that are provided by the browser. So I can manipulate these things. I can play and pause the video, things like that. You know, one of my pet peeves about video on the web is I want to be able to click absolutely anywhere inside of the surface to actually play or pause the video. I don't like always trying to find this little lower. I'm getting some nods, so I'm not the only one that feels this way. Again, great thing about this being a first-class citizen here, I can select and manipulate these elements via JavaScript. So I'm selecting my video tag, and I'm just going to add a click handler. If it's paused, I'm going to play it. If it's played, I'm going to pause it. And then just for fun, I'm going to mess with the user and actually increase the speed of the video every time they play it again when it's paused. Good fun like that. So now I can click on the video. I'm clicking. You're not seeing me, but I promise you I'm clicking. I'll raise my hand. I'm clicking and non-clicking on the video. And now it's running super fast. The user's getting kind of annoyed at me. I am clicking anywhere, and they're never going to visit my site again. But at least I was able to demonstrate how much control I have over the video in JavaScript. The other thing that's worth mentioning here is that the controls are styled differently for each browser. So what that means is that if you, but again, this is okay, because if you actually want your own more granular control over these elements, you can choose to style those yourself. So you can actually apply CSS to the video tag, just like you would any other tag. You can implement your own controls, and as you saw me do here, actually wire these up with JavaScript to actually respond to user interactions. So the next thing that I want to talk about is geolocation. If you have a smartphone or some kind of geolocation-enabled device, you've probably experienced this in your applications before, in your Windows phones and your iPhones. You've seen the great thing that geolocation can be. There is a great specification that's supported across all browsers that actually allows you to add geolocation support to your mobile and desktop web applications as well. And the way that this works is that I actually reference the global navigator object, and I call it geolocation.getCurrentPosition. And when I call geolocation.getCurrentPosition, I pass in two callbacks. One that I'm going to pass in when everything works just fine, and then an error handler as well. The great thing about geolocation as a consumer is that I cannot, as a developer, trick you into giving me your location. Every browser has to ask for your permission. This is an opt-in only feature, so do not fear for now. This is something that the user has to actually give you permission to use. And so you'll see a toast similar to what you see in IE9 at the bottom of the screen there, where it asks for your location. So if you give permission, then it's going to attempt to go look you up. If it finds you, it passes in this position object to the script. And you have properties like chords.latitude, .longitude, and accuracy. Those things are all implemented now. There are other properties that could potentially be implemented later that are in the spec today. Those are things like heading and direction and altitude. So there's a lot more exciting things coming with geolocation in the future as well. And then in this example, once I get the user's coordinates, I'm going to put them on a Bing map. So let's actually take a look at that. So I have a simple Bing map control on the page. And I just want to provide some basic geolocation support to find their current location. So I'm going to create a new map control, and I'm going to call navigator.geolocation.getCurrentPosition. And then I'm going to take their latitude and longitude, and I'm going to put that on the map, center the map to that location, and add a new push pin in that location as well. And then I'm going to provide some details specifically about where they are, the accuracy of that, etc. So let me run this. You'll see here that I'm getting a little toast asking for my physical location. I have some choices here. I can allow it once. I can always allow or always deny and don't tell me. If I deny it, that's going to fire off that error callback that you have to provide. So you're going to, always have a case for what happens when the user says no. Don't just tell them, oh, the browser couldn't find it. Have some better fallback option than that. If I say allow once, I'm putting, and I'm reasonably close to where we are right now, at least in Atlanta, right next to Olympic Park. And again, I think this is actually still cached to my hotel, but you'll see that this is also showing the latitude and longitude coordinates as well as the accuracy. So again, you may be asking yourself, or me, Brandon, that's fantastic, geolocation is great, I want to provide that. A possible use case, consider an app like Yelp. Even on a desktop, there's value in offering to find the user's current location. If I'm looking for a place to eat for lunch, Yelp can offer to find my location and then tell me all the great places that are near me. If it doesn't, you may be asking yourself, what happens when I'm in an older version of the browser? I switch back to IE8. And again, actually, switch back to IE8 and we see my little wonky fallback where I put an image on the screen. This was in case the Wi-Fi was very bad. So I'll run this again. And I get JavaScript errors, right? Again, this is a little bit trickier than looking at something like a CSS3 property like border radius, or even implementing video support or canvas and SVG support. It's trickier because it's not that simple for me to polyfill something that adds geolocation support. There are ways to do it. They tend to be relatively tough. And so this is probably one of those cases where I wouldn't try to bring the browser up to the current time. I'd provide geolocation as my solution for the newer browsers, but I would provide a reasonable, I would provide some graceful degradation for those users that aren't going to support geolocation. So what I'm going to do in this case now, in order to provide that, is I've got this little form on the page here where the user, a fallback form that's hidden by default, where the user can actually enter their address. And so I'm going to check for the modernizer.geolocation property. If geolocation is supported, I'll go on as I was before. Otherwise, I'm going to show the fallback form. And my fallback form essentially just shows that that form, and then wires up a click handler to say that when the user clicks find me, find their address, go and use jQuery's getJSON method to look up their coordinates using the Bing service. And then when you get those coordinates back, put those coordinates on the map. So I can come back and refresh my page now. I have my fallback form, and let's say that we want to see Disney World. That's where I am right now. And I'll say find me, and it'll go and offer a similar sort of support. And then we can see how gigantic the parking lot at Disney World is. I believe it's visible from space. We'll keep on going back. We're not going to try that right now, but it is. So if I'm stepping back into an older version of the browser, I get that support. I go back to IE9, I'm still offering the same features today. I'm still offering that geolocation support to find them automatically. So for the last big use this today thing, we're going to talk about local storage. And for anybody that's still fighting with cookies, hopefully this is good news for you. If you're not, the real point of local storage, as well as some future specifications like IndexedDB, is that these are things that are allowing us to have better storage options locally from within the browser, so that we can cache data better, or so that we can save local information that we don't want to keep transmitting back to the server. So cookies are local storage is often referred to as cookies on steroids, and it really is that. It is an object, it's basically a key value store inside of the browser that I can reference from the global window object, and I call window.localstorage.set or window.localstorage.get. Or I can refer to those items as just window.localstorage directly through the expando, email, name, anything like that. And those values are stored within the browser. Now, a great advantage to these things over cookies is that this doesn't get transmitted back to the server every single time I send a request back to the server. In addition, I have 5 megs of space in local storage as opposed to the 4K, I believe, that we had in cookies. The other thing to keep in mind is that you have to actually handle expiration. These don't expire automatically like cookies. They're really nothing like cookies. You get more storage, you get more space. The one similarity I will give you is that they are just about as secure as cookies, which means don't ever store anything sensitive inside of local storage. That's not what it's meant for. A couple of great use cases for something like this would be to store user preferences, or for a situation where you've created a site and you want to give the user some base functionality and things that they can do with your application even before they actually physically register for an account. Maybe it's an image editing software, and you let them upload a picture and do some things basically with the picture, and then if they like your site, they can go ahead and sign up later, but you're storing the state of what they're doing in their session inside of local storage or inside of session storage, which is also available inside of the browser. This is something that I really, you can also, one thing I will mention is local storage. Strings are the only thing that you can put inside of here, but you can actually use the native JSON.stringify or JSON.parse methods in the browser to actually store broader sets of JSON data. So there are great examples online of actually using local storage as a way to cache web service data that doesn't change that frequently. It's sort of a way of actually improving the performance of the website without making a call back to the server every single time. So let's take a look at local storage. So for local storage, I have this little user preferences form on my site that I want to save. I want to allow the user to give me their name, their email address, their favorite color, whether they like cats or dogs, etc. I don't want to save that stuff. I just want to use it to really amp up. I want to take their experience on my site to 11. So I really want to customize their experience. I don't want to save it on the server, but I do want to provide that for them. So to work with that, what I can do is actually, I'll save those settings. I'll wire up a click handler to the save button, and I'll say window.localstorage.name, email, color, cat or dog, save those items that way. Again, I can use get item or set item. I'm just using the expando representation of the actual key itself to reference those items that I'm saving, and I'm pulling those out of the form fields. So when I refresh the screen, have my personal preferences, I'll say my name is Brandon, email address is b@c.d. Favorite color is salmon, also known as gentleman's pink. Dogs, and the answer to the question is 42. I'll save my preferences. Those are saved. Pull up the F12 developer tools again, and I can actually go into the console here, and I'll type window.localstorage. Zoom in so you can see that. And this is that information that's stored locally for me in the browser. I can use the developer tools to actually manipulate that information. So I'll say local storage.name equals Sarah. Save that, updating that information as well. So I've saved that into local storage now. That's sitting there, that's waiting. Local storage, by the way, in case you're wondering, is scoped at the domain level. So you have 5 megs to use across over an entire domain. Once I've saved those, I can actually now get those back out. So I'll just refer to the items again, local storage.name, pull those, and I will pre-populate then when the user comes back to the site. So I've got that information here. Now, that's nice. I've saved their preferences, but like I said, I really wanted to improve and enhance their experience browsing on my site, really get them excited about all the hard work that I've put into to making this site useful for them. So I'm going to use that information to really tune it up for them a little bit. I'm going to put a little nice picture of a dog on the page. If they say they prefer cats instead, then I'll load some cat information. Basically what I'm doing is I've taken the web back to 1995 using local storage. So you can do that if you so desire. My user has now decided that they have no desire to ever return to my site again. So I've also implemented this feature where I can let them remove the information that's been saved about them inside of local storage. So I can call localstorage.remove item and remove all those items. They'll do that. They're going to close the browser, and they're never going to come back. So if those things are exciting, if they seem like things that you can use in your applications today, good. I want you to. I want you to leave today and start using local storage and geolocation and CSS3 and audio and video and the new semantic markup and Canvas and SVG. But beyond those things, you probably want to know where can I go to see what's next and what's coming. And so I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about what are the things that Microsoft is doing, what are the things that we're doing now and in the future to help you know what's coming next in the next version of our browser, as well as where are we contributing to certain specifications. So I'll talk about some of those things here in a moment, and I'll share that. Microsoft's approach is really fourfold around HTML5. The first is that we want to provide the best site-ready HTML5 today inside of the browser, and that's IE9. And I've talked about IE9 a lot today. You've seen it in all the demos. Hopefully you've downloaded it. If not, all I ask is that you download it and try it. If you don't like it, tell us about it. Give us feedback and let us know what you don't like about it. But if you're not using it yet, please just go and give it a try. The second thing that we're doing is that we're working with developers and providing input on the next version of our browser so that you can see exactly what's coming in the next version and in the future around HTML5. We've also invested in interoperability and provided the largest test suite of HTML5 interoperability tests that have been submitted to the W3C. And then finally, we're using sites like HTML5 Labs to innovate on emerging standards. So I'm going to talk about the second and the fourth thing today, IE10 and also HTML5 Labs. So if you're familiar with the IE9 process and the lead up over the last year, you know that from around March of 2010 to March of this year, we released 8 different platform previews for IE, all spread about 6 to 8 weeks apart. And every single one of those platform previews provided a little bit more input on what was going to be coming in the next version of the browser. And then not to end there, less than a month after we released IE9, we actually released the first platform preview for IE10, which showed off some of the features that we were already looking at adding in the next version of the browser. So things like great CSS properties like grid and flexbox and gradients and multi-column. And also ECMAScript strict mode. And I fully expect that that type of cadence will continue as we continue to provide platform previews so that you as a developer can see what's coming and also give us feedback on those features. Try those things out and tell us if we missed the boat on an implementation or if we did a great job. And so I'll show you now just a quick look. If you haven't yet downloaded the IE10 platform preview, you can go to ietestdrive.com to install that. And ietestdrive.com actually has all, this is where you would actually go and download IE platform preview. I'm running it right now. And so this is basically a side-by-side. It's just a very skinned-down version of the browser. I'm running this side-by-side with IE9. I don't have an address bar, but I can actually go to a remote location, so I can see how my own pages and my sites render in what's coming in IE10. I can also report issues, so this is a good place to provide feedback, which again, we really, really want to hear your feedback, not only on IE9, but on the things that we're talking about in IE10. And then I can also from here look at some performance demos, some speed demos, look at how we're tuning JavaScript to run faster in the next version of the browser, but also some of those specific features that we're implementing. So that's things like CSS3 Flexbox. So flexible layout gives you better control in CSS over box orientation and layout on alignment on your pages. So you can experiment with some of these features and see how they work. CSS3 great. All right. I can try to yell. Oh, of course. That was perfect. And then I can actually create those gradients and then actually see what they're going to look like, what the CSS would be to create that, not just in IE10, but across other browsers as well, so I can experiment with some of those things. If you haven't yet downloaded gone to ietestdrive.com to download this, please do so and start giving us feedback. The other thing that I want to mention is what we're doing with some of those specifications that are popular and that people are talking about, but aren't really yet ready for prime time in a lot of ways. So we've created a site called HTML5 Labs, which is at html5labs.com, and this is where we're talking about those experimental or unstable standards that people are getting really excited about. Some of that future-looking stuff that really still needs some work in order to lay down before we can get it in. So if you look at it this way, really, IE9 is obviously that site-ready HTML5 that you can and should use today. And IE10 is where we're telling you this is what's coming next, so you can know about this and be prepared for it. HTML5 Labs is where we haven't yet decided when this is actually going to make it in the browser because the specification is still so new or there's still so much work actually happening on it. But we do want to give you a place to play with it, a place to actually download these prototypes or see the things that we're looking at. So there's a couple of such prototypes that I want to talk about today and one that I'm going to demo. The first one is really exciting. This is WebSockets. And WebSockets is essentially real-time communication on the web. We've long been burdened by the fact that we couldn't create real-time applications in our websites because our only transport mechanism was HTTP. And that in order to actually get responses back from a server, we had to poll. So to be real-time, we had all kinds of strategies for kind of being quasi-real-time, but we were never real-time enough. And so what we have with WebSockets is actually the ability to open a TCP connection to a server and allow other clients to open up connections to that endpoint as well. And then we can actually subscribe to receive messages or to actually receive a callback when a message comes in at that endpoint. So we now not only have real-time, and the only payload that goes back with your message is the message itself. There are no HTTP headers that go back with that, so performance gets lightning fast. And it is real-time because you get that message immediately. So if you look at an example like the Facebook chat application that I know you all use every day, right now, that's implemented via HTTP. And there's a lot of polling happening to figure out exactly when somebody is giving a response back to you or whether you're responding, or whether you're typing or have sent a message to the person that you're chatting with. With WebSockets, you can actually open a socket. And in our prototype that's available on HTML5 Labs, just so we're clear on the fact that it's not done, we've called this a WebSocket draft. You create a new version of that object, add an endpoint. You can open a socket and send messages to that socket and receive messages as well. The other specification that I want to talk about is the file API. So this actually gives us file level access in the browser similar to what we've had on our servers and in .NET for so many years now. So we can actually get information about files on the user's file system if they allow us to. And we can actually load those files and read files in as text. We can also load images in as text and load blob data in as text, load blob data in and allow those things to be displayed in the user's browser as well. And I'm going to show you some of those. I'll show you file API specifically right now. So HTML5 Labs, again I mentioned, it's html5labs.com. We have a couple of our prototypes actually listed up here. We have 3 that are available, one that we've announced for media capture. But we have some work out there around IndexedDB, WebSockets, and File API. You can actually go and see some of our Azure-hosted demos for some of these things. But download the prototype and play with this yourself. Again, of course, the caveat is that this is not ready to be implemented today. So please don't put this in production. But it's there for you to use. It's there for you to give us feedback on. And also provide feedback to the W3C because these specs still need work. And they still need your input. So I'm going to open up my File API demo here. I've downloaded the File API demo from HTML5 Labs. And on side of this page, I just have a couple of boxes here where I'm going to read in a file as text and then also select an image. So to read in this text file here, I have the Gettysburg Address. And so this is basically just a simple text file. I've loaded up this text file in memory inside of the browser. And I put this SVG scroll on the screen, done a nice little font for the text and skewed it and put it overside the scroll. Why did I do this? Well, because I could. And I was building the demos. The second thing that I can do, so I've taken that just simple text file in memory, pulled it, and I'm displaying it in the browser window. The second thing I can do is select an image. That actually creates a blob URI, an actual representation of where that file exists on the user's file system without actually revealing the user's underlying file system. So this is a secure way of loading this image up into the browser and providing access to it, but not actually giving you full-on access or knowledge of the user's file system. And so I have this image of my son in a cowboy hat next to a watermelon like a good Texan, and I've rounded the corners and added a little box shadow to that. If I pull up my F12 developer tools, and I can actually show you that when you look at the source for this image, it's not actually a physical location. It is this blob value, that blob that was created for me by the implementation of the specification inside of my browser. So let me show you what's actually going on there. For reading the file as text, I'm creating this new file reader draft object. And then I'm just wiring up a bunch of handlers for load start, on progress, on load, things like that. At the end, I'm calling read as text. So I'm telling the file reader object to read that in as text. And then when I get that item, I'm just taking that, I'm placing a status on the screen, and then I'm calling my display text function with that string text value, and that's where I'm doing all the other work to put it on the scroll and things like that. And then for actually loading up an image, the only thing that I'm doing different here is I'm calling this window.url draft object, which is a global object that we've added as a part of the prototype that you can use to actually get a blob representation of that file. And then once I have that blob URL, I can specify that as the source to my image tag on the page and load that up that way. So again, much richer access to files inside of the browser. And that's unstable, and that's still really being landed and still solidifying as a spec, but definitely something worth looking at. So you saw today Visual Studio 2010 SP1, Expression Web 4 SP1, and Web Matrix. I want to reiterate today that all of those tools already have features that support HTML5 development. You have the HTML5 schema and IntelliSense in both VSS SP1 and Expression Web. And in Web Matrix, you have the HTML5 default doc type. In addition, if you're using ASP.NET MVC3 and you've downloaded the tools update that we announced at Mix, you also have an HTML5 template option for all of your new projects. And as well, Modernizer 1.7 actually ships in the box with those projects. So you'll already have Modernizer there waiting for you as a NuGet package to use inside of your applications. So as I wrap up here today, your call to action is pretty simple. Read, learn, and go and do. All right, read a couple of good HTML5 books. And I mentioned, too, because every author is going to have a real unique perspective on what's important in HTML5. And you want to read, too, to get a better picture of what's really being talked about and what people are excited about. Read a good CSS3 book and relearn JavaScript just as a language on its own. I highly recommend JavaScript, The Good Parts by Douglas Crockford, or Eloquent JavaScript. And all of these books here are actually available on site here today at TechEd in the bookstore, and definitely pick one or more of those up. And then finally, of course, learn a JavaScript framework like jQuery and continue to use that, continue to adopt that in your applications. And learn the dev tools in your favorite browser. And if that's IE9, just hit F12 and go. Now, I'll mention a couple of sessions here in a second. I'll reiterate now that the tools, the technologies in HTML5 that I think you should adopt today are semantic markup, Canvas, audio and video, geolocation, SVG, web storage, and CSS3. I wish I could have spent more time on CSS3 as a standalone, but I can tell you that tomorrow morning, Todd Anglin is actually doing a session on HTML5 and CSS3 that you should go and check out. Beyond the things that you should go and use today, go check out the IE10 platform preview and the HTML5 labs. And again, you can reach me on Twitter at Brandon Satrom. I'm on, my blog is userandexperience.com. I do have a few moments for questions, but before I get to that, I want to mention two things. Number one, please fill out your evals if you're leaving. Hopefully that's where you're going, right to the computers to give me very, very high speaker scores. And you should go check out all of these sessions here that I've listed now. Tomorrow morning, as I said, Todd Anglin is doing a talk on HTML5 and CSS3. He'll probably spend more time on CSS than I was able to today. Damian Edwards is doing a talk on JavaScript, jQuery, and Ajax. The wonderful John Box is doing a couple of sessions on IE9, one on F12 and another on site pinning. And then Jonathan Carter is doing a session on JavaScript and HTML5 applications. Those would all be worth your time. Those are all fantastic speakers. Please go check them out. So here are a couple of resources for the track itself. A couple of other resources. Again, please fill out your evals. And are there any questions? And if you do have a question, please come up to one of the mics here and ask it. Otherwise, thank you for coming. Appreciate you being here.